We can't gather in person this year, but we've adapted. The 2020 Milwaukee Film Festival brings the best in film from across the globe and around the corner. And this year, it's all virtual, so the films and events are coming directly to you. Join us for the 2020 Milwaukee Film Festival, October 15th through the 29th. More information is at mkefilm.org/MFF.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Day 5 of the 2020 Milwaukee Film Festival presented by Associated Bank. My name is Kirsten Larson, and I'm the Programming Director at Milwaukee Film. And this is the Nightcap presented by the Yabuki Family Foundation. Be sure to cast your vote for the Alan H. Budd and Suzanne L. Seelig Audience Award. And to do that, you'll visit the Film or Shorts program page at watch.mkefilm.org. Log in with your pass or ticket code and click the button that says Vote Now, and you'll be connected to the form that serves as your ballot. And we really encourage you to do that because we all are big on voting right now. So you got to vote for the festival, vote for the election. You can do it all. As you've seen, we have a double up challenge happening right now, thanks to the generosity of Judith McGregor and Richard Galloon. If we raise $75,000 during the festival, they'll double it. So you can text double up to 44321 or go to mkefilm.org/donate to donate. Or you can go to mkefilm.org/members to become a member, and that will also help us meet our goal. We are currently 61% of the way there, which I feel like is pretty good for this point in the festival, but we could completely meet our goal before the festival is even over. And that would be amazing. So like I said, you can become a member and that will support us. And we can't do anything that we do without our members. As a member, you get access to free films throughout the year, discounts on tickets, passes, and more. Plus our members keep our nonprofit Milwaukee Film going. And so you should check out our website and we will be forever grateful. So tonight is our unofficial sci-fi night of the Nightcap, and we will be joined by Marco Baldonado, the director of Toto, which is in the Shorts Grab Bag 2020 program. We have Amber Love with A Galaxy Sits in the Cracks, and Eric Haywood with The Last Starship. And then we're going to close out the night with Noah Hutton, who is the director of LAPSIS. And just so you know, any platform that you're on, you can put in a question in the comments and it'll pop up on our screen. And then we will be able to ask our very special guests. So make sure you get to have your voice be heard because you might not just want to listen to me talk the whole time. So to start out, we'll bring Marco up on screen to talk about his film Toto.
Hey.
Hello, Marco, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I usually start out with an easy peasy question. What was the inspiration to make this film?
Oh, wow. Sorry, I'm a giggly guy. I'm so guilty for it. I think the inspiration, I think it was kind of instructing like my mom how to use her smartphone and just seeing how it's like such an alien device to her. Like just the way, you know, she has no idea how it operates. And I think there's a lot there for comedy and there's a lot there for storytelling. And I think, yeah, that was a big inspiration.
I definitely, watching my parents explain technology to my grandparents, completely understand. And it would be pretty cool if we just had giant robots who could help her out and just be really handy. But I guess your short shows us that that can get complicated. So I'm curious because I really love that your film is sort of like a sci-fi film with an older woman as the main character. You don't really see like older characters in sci-fi. It's usually like hot young people, and then they might have like a sage advisor who's old. But this one is focusing on Nona. So how did you end up casting Nona?
So yeah, the short film stars my grandmother and a robot. Yeah, and you know, half of it was I knew if I were to cast my grandmother, she's available. She's like super, she's going to give me all her trust and all her love to this project. So I know for like an actor, first-time actor, that's what you really want. Someone's going to give you their all. And I'm super grateful that she did that for me. The second part, and this is more like the filmmaker side, but like keeping your budget low, casting, using what you got, the people around you. If I cast my Nonna, I have the location. It's the house she lives in. And so just to keep things small. And I found by playing small, you're able just to, share something that can be big, hopefully. You put all your power into something small so that you can make the quality very great. And yeah.
So what was it like directing your grandma in a film?
It was challenging. So she doesn't speak a lick of English. So I had to speak Italian with her. And that's another part of the film where she speaks no English and the robot's translating for her, kind of like a Google Home. I had to speak Italian to her while the rest of the film crew had no idea what was going on. They just had to hope and pray that something was happening. And, but she got it. Like at the end of the day, again, when you're working with someone who's not an actor, I didn't want to ask too much from her, just to be herself, the best version of herself. And, with practice, kind of like we practiced for a few weeks and it was kind of like a dance routine. And practice makes perfect, little by little. And, she's rocking and rolling.
She really is. Has she gotten to see the film?
She has, and she's so shy. She's so, every time she sees herself, she's always like, oh my goodness, is that me? And what's phenomenal is that she does such a good job. Like, holy macaroni. Like, so yeah, she's really hard on herself, like a classic artist, so yeah, but she's brilliant.
No, I definitely agree. She was fantastic in the film. So I really love the design of Toto the Robot. And so can you tell us more about the costume design for the robot? And then also, like, was there a person inside of it acting?
Sorry, is there echoing occurring? Is that okay? Okay. Part one would be, so the inspiration of the design of the robot, obviously Big Hero 6 was a big inspiration, as well as Google Home. So you'll notice the 4 lights on its chest, very similar to the Google Home device. And there's another robot. It was like a prototype robot. It's called Robear. It was manufactured in Japan and was used in the hospitals there to take care of the elderly. So I kind of mashed those 3 devices together to make Toto. Then I got Rita Kaleva involved. She's a costume designer, and a collaboration with her, it took about a year. And the material was made out of a lot of material used for cosplay. I forget the name for it exactly, but it's very lightweight. And so that's how we were able to create this grand machine, but still it be maneuverable. And below the surface, it was, I don't know, I don't want to spoil it, but I guess I will. It's the co-writer of this short film, Walter Woodman, is inside of the machine piloting it. And it was so hot inside of that thing. And man, that guy truly, a true warrior to step inside of it and play the robot.
Well, I don't think that's spoiling. I think it looks great in the short. And yeah, my compliments to your writer, because you always hear about like C-3PO or like Chewbacca in Star Wars, how they were like dying inside the costume. So I think it turned out great. And you couldn't even tell that it was super hot in there. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us tonight. The short is wonderful. As a reminder to everybody, it's in the Shorts Grab Bag 2020 program. So you got to check it out if you haven't already. And yeah, thank you so much, Marco.
Thank you very much.
So now we'll move and he's going to talk with our filmmakers, Eric and Amber.
Let's try this again. Thank you for telling me that I'm muted. So once again, I'm Dante McFadden. I'm the programmer for Black Lens within the 2020 Milwaukee Film Festival. I am honored to have 2 films in the Black Lens Shorts Exploration and Inspiration Program. That are A Galaxy Sits in the Cracks, directed by Amber Love, and The Last Starship, directed by Eric Haywood. So I'd like to invite them both to take part in this conversation. So, Amber, Eric, how you both doing?
Doing good.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's an honor to have both your films in the Black Lens Shorts program, at least in one of the programs. And, given this time that we're living in right now, the fact that we're doing this film festival virtually, it really means a lot that, your art can provide joy and inspiration during a time where the sources are quite scarce. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Before we get into the films, I just want to do a personal check-in with you both. If you can, first, let people know who you are, what you do, and where you're checking in from and how you doing. So, however you want to respond to that question.
Amber, you first.
All right. Yeah, so I'm in Chicago currently, so not that far from Milwaukee, actually. Hop, skip, and a jump in a 45-minute car ride away. I'm doing okay. I voted today. I early voted today. Everyone go early vote. Otherwise, I make films. I work as a documentary editor. I also work as a festival programmer. So basically, I just really like film, and it's just my entire life. And really, I should get a hobby or something. But yeah, I'm doing okay. I think doing festivals has given me, things to look forward to separate from our current political landscape, which has been nice. Eric, you're up.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Eric Haywood. I am checking in from Los Angeles, California. However, I am a native of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was born and raised in Milwaukee. I'm a product of Milwaukee Public Schools. I got my bachelor's in filmmaking degree from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So I sort of have Milwaukee very much in my blood. So it was a special honor to have been selected for this particular festival. I'm a TV writer by trade. I've been doing that for a number of years. But I've always kept my eye on a lot of the goings on back in my home state. So, like I said, yeah, just really, really honored to be part of this year's festival. And I also voted. I voted a couple of weeks ago. I got the email and the text confirmation that my ballot was received and will be counted. So, I've done my part.
Thank you both, and also thank you for chiming in about your civic duty. So, when you go into the Black Lens Shorts Exploration and Inspiration Program, you will notice that Galaxy Sits in the Cracks and The Last Starship play back to back. So in determining the sequencing of that, I think having a documentary about Afrofuturism going to a fictional film that talks about a family trying to leave Earth to make it safely to another universe. That was just something that I had in mind. I thought it was an intriguing transition. And what I find interesting about both films is that they imagine an unseen world that promises safety, possibility, and freedom to live the lives that they want to live. Amber, with your film, you're talking specifically about Afrofuturism and how that figures into the vision of the 4 people that you interview throughout. And then, Eric, I think with your film, it's there's greater stakes. It's people, trying to leave a space, a site that's become desolate, and there is, nothing available to them to help preserve their lives. And so I do have individual questions for each of you, but a couple questions I have for both of you. So what inspired you to want to make these films?
I guess I'll go first this time. I have always been sort of a lifelong science fiction fan. Everything from the big, blockbuster Star Wars type movies down to the more sort of character-driven Twilight Zone type of stories. And I wanted to. Normally, I don't get to work in that space, no pun intended, for a living. So I finally decided, this is going to be my opportunity to tell a story that has a science fiction theme. I will also be totally honest and say that the opportunity to tell a science fiction story with a predominantly Black cast was also a big part of my motivation, even though the subject matter is not necessarily culturally specific. It's more universal in terms of just like the need for a group of human beings to survive and live. But I feel like, we rarely sort of get shown in a type of story like this where, it's just primarily driven by the character's humanity first and foremost. And then specifically, there's sort of this common theme in a lot of science fiction storytelling about the discovery of a distant habitable planet. And, there have been several movies where you follow sort of like the main characters as they, get aboard a gigantic spaceship and they go off and they travel, several hundred light years or whatever to get to this, distant planet. And it dawned on me, being the pessimistic Capricorn that I am, I was like, well, if and when the day ever comes when this opportunity presents itself, not everybody's going to get to go. So what intrigued me was the story, not about the pioneer who goes off and discovers the planet, but about the people who get left behind. And there are some, I would imagine there would be some sort of political and economic factors that decide who gets to go and who doesn't. And that sort of gave me the opportunity to tell a story that felt like it had a very broad scope with just a handful of characters and a handful of locations.
That's interesting. That brings up some other things for me, but I'm sure we'll get into it. Yeah. So I was writing something a couple of years ago that was vaguely sci-fi, and a lot of the folks who I was sharing my work with were kind of like, oh, this feels Afrofuturist, you should look into that. And so I spent some time looking into that. And actually one of the first people that I came across was Ingrid LaFleur. And I came across her because she had run for mayor of Detroit on an Afrofuturist platform. And so, of course, that immediately sparked my interest in kind of, Afrofuturism is so commonly publicly seen as kind of an art form or kind of a visual aesthetics or a sonic aesthetic. And so it was immediately incredibly interesting to me to see that there were people who are using Afrofuturism as an epistemology, as a way of being, as a way of teaching youth and kind of just going about their day-to-day lives. So I really wanted to explore, what are kind of the lived dimensions of Afrofuturism as people are experiencing them, and also kind of what are the contours of that, because as we just kind of touched upon, not everything that has Black people and is sci-fi is Afrofuturist necessarily. And I think that, terms are useful as long as they're useful, basically. So it's really interesting for me to think about what the contours of Afrofuturism are. And so I love making documentary because I get to learn something all the time. I get to learn something every day. And so the deeper I went into this, the more I was just kind of thinking, I couldn't follow one particular person. I really wanted to kind of do a survey or a primer. And so the film is organized into a series of short movements, basically, that are kind of interviews and or some verite moments and just kind of being with different people living different facets of Afrofuturism in their day-to-day lives. And really, there are so many people that I didn't get to interview, didn't get to sit down with. And so my hope is that this is kind of an open door for people to continue and to move forward and to learn more about kind of how Afrofuturism has, you know, very practical applications, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. And you interview some dynamic people in this film that I want to talk to you more about in a little bit. And, you know, something that, you know, that really comes to mind is, you know, just in each of your films in your own way, you talk about the possibility of helping people and building community. You know, that's something that, you know, that definitely comes across in your example, Amber, about Ingrid LaFleur. You know, especially when she talks about, you know, big cryptocurrency. And, you know, what's interesting about that, there's another film in this festival that's in the Cine Sin Fronteras program, Landfall. You have these Bitcoin and cryptocurrency entrepreneurs in Puerto Rico, basically being the new colonizers. Whereas in this context, you know, it's more so about a form of economic empowerment and creating wealth to not only live the life that you want to live, but live the life that your community wants to live. And I definitely identify that in your film, Eric, through Malik, who you know, at least from my perspective, I see as the moral center of the film. You see the contraption that he's working with, and you know, through multiple attempts, he's able to get it to work. And you know, it's the immediate thing that comes to mind is how he can use that to help other people. So you know, that's something that I notice in each of your films. Another question I have for the both of you is, you know, if you can explain the importance of space in your film, literally and figuratively. Literally meaning in terms of where it's shot, and then also figuratively. And you talked a little bit about the figurative part, but you know, you certainly can expand on that. And then if you could talk a little more about the literal part.
Yeah, I can kick this one off. So in terms of space, I guess it's both literal and figurative. So there are After Effects portions of the film, there are animated portions of the film that largely kind of bring in a galaxy motif throughout. And so visually, the visual idea of space for me was kind of thinking about possibility and imagination, which are things, again, that we've talked about in this conversation. And so it was really important to me in thinking about these animated segments for nothing to be full screen animation. Everything needed to be kind of rooted very specifically in the image that you're seeing, in the space that you're in, because that is one thing that everyone in the film is really doing, is kind of looking at what is directly in front of them, what are the spaces in front of them, what are the resources in front of them, and how can they imagine and create and actually like breathe into life new ways of kind of gathering and being together in a community. And so I felt it was important to kind of bring in this animated imagery because, you know, with film, it's really an exciting medium because you can kind of go beyond what is directly in front of you. There's the opportunity to kind of enter almost a third space, and that you're here and you're documenting what is in front of you, but you can kind of make alterations and you can kind of get at a different kind of truth, maybe an emotional truth. There are just so many different ways of representing truth. And so for me, it was really nice to kind of enter this third space in this film where, you know, Yatasha can be talking about Chicago State and kind of, which is a historically Black university on the south side of Chicago. She can be talking about Chicago State and she can kind of talk about all of the things she's imagined in her head. And I can actually bring that forward and I can create that for people. And in fact, in terms of physical space, physical where I'm shooting, I chose to open the film with kind of this space segment. Space, again, there meaning literally the space that we're in kind of this discussion of how she's seeing layered histories in particular spaces, and how you see the past meets the present meets the future, and kind of this compression of time in order to create something productive is another kind of hallmark of Afrofuturism. And so it's kind of a moment where it's a way of how to read this film, or a way of how to read the places around you, you know, thinking about historically what has happened here, and how can we take that history and kind of look forward. So throughout the film, there are kind of little nods to the history of Afrofuturism, the history of Afrofuturist thinkers, but also the history of thinkers who did not call themselves Afrofuturist and are not considered Afrofuturist. So we shoot in Detroit, we shoot in Chicago, we shoot in Durham. These are places that have very deep, rich histories, particularly the Black communities that have lived and thrived there. So I can go on for honestly too long about kind of all the layered histories that are present in the spaces. But that's kind of a general overview of how I was thinking about space in this film.
Thank you.
Well, my film is story-wise, it is literally about space. It's about a group of people trying to figure out how they can travel through space to get to this distant habitable planet. And one of the challenges that I knew I was going to face when I embarked on this story was how to convey to the viewer the idea that, you know, the planet that we're on has largely been decimated and evacuated by a large segment of the population. And knowing that I was making this film on a fairly modest budget, one of the ways that we came up with to convey that visually is the film opens with this wide drone shot of the main character driving down this completely deserted highway. And in order to achieve that shot, we had to go way out into the actual, California desert, quite a ways north of Los Angeles. And we found the perfect strip of deserted road. And that's sort of like your point of entry into the movie. If you see this bird's eye angle view shot of this truck driving down the road all by itself, because I knew also that going forward into the story, the lion's share of the film takes place inside the confines of one house, and I didn't want the entire film to feel claustrophobic. So opening and closing with sort of like very wide open shots that sort of give you the sense that these people are really alone and there's no civilization for miles and miles around, had the added value of sort of lending a lot of production value to the film for, relatively low cost. So we were able to kill two birds with one stone.
That's excellent. Thank you. So I have individual questions for each of you that directly is about the people involved in the film. And I find that, interesting, posing that question to someone who's made a documentary and someone who's made a fictional film. So Amber, with regards to your film, how did you go about identifying people? You talked about Ingrid LaFleur, but if you could talk about the people that you identified to be in this documentary, and just based on your interactions with them, how did you come to develop the thread for the storyline that we see?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are maybe 4 people that I interview prominently. And honestly, I came to each in very different ways. Ingrid, for example, was someone who I actively sought out, as was Yatasha Womack. So both of them, just in researching and doing a lot of reading around Afrofuturism, they were 2 people that kind of naturally rose to the top. Like I said, Ingrid ran for mayor of Detroit in, I believe, 2017 on a platform of Afrofuturism. So that had a lot of press, and naturally her name came up. And Yatasha has just written so many books, both fiction and nonfiction, in the Afrofuturist space. She's a filmmaker, and she's also Chicago-based. So she was someone who also naturally came up. Pierce at Black Space, which is in Durham, North Carolina, was actually someone who came to me from like a third-party connection. I happened to be kind of at a producing workshop with another filmmaker who works in Durham. And I mentioned him that I was doing this project, and he was just kind of like, oh yeah, like I know someone who you should talk to. I know someone who runs an Afrofuturist youth space in Durham, and like, if you're interested, you should go chat. And so that's how he came through. And then I was also kind of in thinking about like, what are the bounds and boundaries of Afrofuturism? I have been reading an article. I set a Google alert on my email just for like anytime Afrofuturism comes up in Chicago, just so I would like kind of know like what's going on. And an article came into my email about Sheridan actually, and she had mentioned in the article, she's a curator, and in somewhere in that article, she said something about being kind of hesitant to call the show she was curating an Afrofuturist show. Which was incredibly compelling to me, because up till that point, it had been a lot of people who were really eager to use Afrofuturism, really eager to kind of use the label. And I was interested in a counterpoint possibly, but it's kind of funny, by the time I talked to her, she had kind of come around and been like, oh, like, I actually don't think it was that bad. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. But so, yeah, everyone came to me in very different ways, and they were all just incredibly gracious. I mean, some I had a connection to, some I just reached out to blindly and was like, hey, will you talk to me, please? And everyone is so gracious. And I mean, they're community leaders, they are teachers. This is their work. And so they were all very kind with their time. But yeah, that's kind of how I came across most of the folks. And of course, there are folks, like I said, I did this on a very small budget. So there are Afrofuturist groups in Oakland who are really active. There's the Quantum Futurists in Philadelphia. There's a lot of groups that I just could not travel to go meet. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Eric,
Yes.
as you were writing your script, how did you come about developing these characters, and how did you come to make the the central point of this film a dilemma between determining which family has to stay behind and which family gets to go, and both families going?
Well, like I said earlier, a lot of the kind of storytelling that interests me is not so much the spectacle of spaceships and laser guns, although I do enjoy a good spaceship and laser gun movie. But what interests me even more are stories in which the characters face genuine moral dilemmas and have are making decisions that have life and death consequences, that have no cut and dry right and wrong answers. So very early on, I sort of zeroed in on the idea of a sort of tug of war between mother and son. This family gets an opportunity to be among the last people to leave the planet. But in order to do that, someone else has to suffer. Someone else, so the question becomes, is it okay for you to save yourself at someone else's expense? Or do you let that opportunity pass by in order to help some people who are in need? And I was able to sort of identify fairly early on that was the ideal sort of dilemma to put between this mother and son, with Malik being young and bright and very idealistic, and his mother Claire being very jaded and only concerned with her immediate family's survival. And I sort of turn them loose and let them butt heads. And I decided to end the story in a way that didn't completely answer the question, but it answered the question, but it also, I hope, opened the door to more questions by the end of the story. So,
and that's what I personally found fascinating about your film, the fact that everything that they spent the duration of the narrative talking about what they can do or what they couldn't do, they eventually come to do, and you're left to find out, will this work out or not? So. That was something I appreciated. And And there are some recognizable actors in your film, and if you could talk about how you went about casting the characters.
Well, the first thing I did was I wrote the script. I didn't even tell anybody that I was doing it until I actually had a script that I felt I was proud enough to approach the people that I ended up approaching. I had been a writer for a TV show called Empire for a number of years, and I watched Grace Byers basically handle every single thing that the writers threw at her. If we needed her to be dramatic, she could be dramatic. If we needed her to be funny, she could be funny. If we needed her to be a femme fatale, she could do that. And I always felt like, we were only able to utilize like a tenth of what she could do as an actor. So I'm going to write something for her. That's what I'm going to do. And in fact, so I wrote the main character with Grace in mind, and I had decided that if she either didn't like the script or liked the script but couldn't make it work for her schedule, if for any reason she wasn't willing or able to do the film, then I probably just wasn't going to make it. I was so sort of like attached to the idea of her playing the lead. And then once I finished it, I called her and I said, here's what I'm doing. I have no money, but I would basically be honored to have you as a part of this. And she read it and she was like, I'm in, just tell me where to be. And we shot the film over 3 days. And it just so happened that she was coming back to LA from somewhere like that Thursday. And she was leaving again that Monday to go somewhere else for another. So she actually had, coincidentally, this window of opportunity that lined up with when I wanted to shoot. I hired a casting director who brought Loretta Devine into the mix. And Loretta did me a huge favor by appearing in the film. And actually, I had to write a personal letter to Loretta, telling her specifically why I wanted her and what I thought she would bring to the film. And I actually, as I think back on it, it was more nerve-wracking writing that one-page letter to this legendary actress than it was writing the entire script. Because I felt like if I don't get her, then anybody else who I do cast in my mind is going to feel like a step down. And she read that and she was like, I'm in, and she showed up, and no entourage, no fuss, no muss. She did her thing. And it was great. So I went about my casting process in a number of different ways. So Grace I knew personally. My casting director found Loretta and Jalen, who plays Malik. Jack Coleman I did not know and had never worked with, although I had been a fan of Jack's literally since I saw him on Dynasty when I was growing up as a kid in the 80s. And I just kind of knew him casually through social media, through Twitter. And one day I said, well, you know what? He's probably too busy or he's probably too expensive, but I'm going to just shoot my shot and see, he's going to say no, and then I can move on to finding whoever else is going to end up ultimately playing the part. And so I tweeted him and I said, hey, can I send you a message? And he said, sure. And then I basically told him who I was and what I was doing. And we had communicated a couple times, just really in passing. And then we met for breakfast and I said, here's what I'm doing and here's how I see you fitting in. And same thing. I think when people know that it is a very short time commitment, we only needed Jack for 2 of the 3 days. When they know there's a fairly short time commitment and they know there's not a big paycheck involved, either they're all in or they're not. So once they say yes, you kind of like, they come on board as collaborators. And then the last cast member, Anthony Mendez, who was our narrator, once again, he's another person who I had known. I was a huge fan of Jane the Virgin, and I wrote a narrator into the script, hearing his voice in my head. Didn't really know him. We had met once, I think, sort of informally. And then when I was ready to shoot the script or make the film, I made the same approach. I said, here's what I'm doing. It's all self-financed, it's micro-budgeted. And he, because he does voiceover for a living, he has a whole audio set up in his house. He recorded it with me listening on the line. We did his lines in like an hour. So everybody sort of responded, I think. I like to think. They responded to the script and the story. They got what I was trying to do. And like I said, once you commit to something where you know it's not going to necessarily be a summer blockbuster, once you're in, you're kind of in, and everybody showed up and brought their A game and worked for a fraction of what they're worth.
Thank you. Yeah, it's quite inspiring to see how all of these different components come together. To work, and you're able to create what you want. So congratulations with that. And I want to close with a couple questions. One, in terms of where you're from. Eric, you mentioned that you are a native of Milwaukee. Happy to have you be a part of this. And Amber, you're based in Chicago. I'm curious to know how, either being from the Midwest or working in the Midwest, how does that inform your storytelling? How does that inspire your storytelling?
That's interesting, because I have a project right now that I unfortunately can't go into detail on, but it's actually set in Milwaukee. And I've been trying to create something that I could actually shoot in Milwaukee for a long time. It's kind of hard to say, because I'm not sure, being from, the Midwest, it's like, I don't know how my sensibility would have been different if I had been raised on the East Coast, or if I had been born and raised in Southern California. I sort of am who I am based on, all the things that I encountered when I was growing up. But I do think not growing up near a huge hub of film and television production just always made me hungry and curious about the process. I wanted to read everything that I can get my hands on. I wanted to watch interviews, everything that I can get my hands on, and just learn more and more about the process. So I feel like from the time that I was in high school, what I'm doing now is sort of 95% of what I envisioned myself doing from back then. So it definitely gave me, I think, the drive to work harder.
Thank you.
It's a really good question. So I am based in Chicago and actually grew up in Michigan. So also Midwest born and raised. And my father's from the Detroit area, and my mom is from the Flint area. So it goes deep. And I think the Midwest is honestly such a rich place. There's so many stories here, and particularly there's so many communities of color here. And I think that the Midwest frequently gets kind of a weird rap for being like very homogenous and like a lot of cornfields, and quite frankly, very white. And it's just absolutely not the case. The Midwest is such a crossing grounds for so many different movements throughout the history of the United States, from, the Great Migration and movements west, so many different groups of people and so many music styles and theater styles, and all of these different things have kind of passed through and grown out of the Midwest. And so I look around me and I just see so many stories and people and communities who are kind of left out of the conversation. And so that gives me a lot of, it fires me up, honestly, to kind of be here and tell these stories and work with other filmmakers and artists who have chosen to stay in the Midwest, because the community is so deep and it's so tight, and people are so accessible here in a way that is not necessarily the case, in a way that I find really, really attractive. And so basically, just the diversity of stories here really enriches my artistic practice. And I think similarly, I didn't grow up anywhere else, so I don't necessarily know how my storytelling would be different. But I think that I'm deeply interested in kind of the history of the Midwest and what we've seen and what has come through here and what has come out of here, because so many things have, very much so.
Yeah, thank you both. And as I was listening to your responses, I listened to this podcast called Heat Rocks. It's a deep dive into an album that a guest wants to talk about. They recently had on Hanif Abdurraqib. He is a prominent writer based out of Columbus, Ohio. He wrote a book about a tribe called Quest that I really need to. And he was talking about being from Ohio and, particularly from the Dayton area where a lot of funk music comes from, how that gave him a source of pride. So that was running through as I was listening to your responses. Thank you both, for your films, being in the Black Lens Shorts program, for being in the 2020 Milwaukee Film Festival. Amber Love, the director of A Galaxy Sits in the Cracks, and Eric Haywood, the director of The Last Starship. So thank you very much for your time, especially this late in the evening, and also just for bearing with me this late in the evening. So
no problem. It's been great.
Honestly, thank you so much. This is great.
So appreciate you spending your time. So let's turn it back to Kirsten.
Thank you, Dante. So now we're going to close out the evening with Noah Hutton, the director of the film LAPSIS. Hi, Noah. How are you?
Hey, Kirsten. Doing well. How are you?
Still pretty good. It was really fascinating to listen to. So I'm also excited to get into our conversation. And Dante had so many good questions. I'm going to start out with an easy one again, just to get us started, which is, where did the inspiration for the story of LAPSIS come from?
It's always a big question. It comes from so many different little places, But I'd say the impetus to make a film like this was, first of all, because there was a lot of conversation in the last discussion about genre and some sci-fi fans there, and myself as well. But I guess I come to sci-fi not really wanting to make what I call a white collar sci-fi story, which is sort of, I would call it a story about the people who make a technology or benefit from it directly, very glossy. And I think that blue collar sci-fi is more where my story sits. And that's sort of like the people who are on the underbelly of the technology, and it trickles down. By the time it trickles down to them, they're just trying to get by and they don't really care so much. They're not really benefiting from it so much. So it's more of a working class struggle that comes from the world we live in now, and just sort of translates into this parallel present sci-fi world that we've created. So that was sort of like the genre frame of it. And then, I don't know, I mean, I guess it kind of comes from wanting to do something that looks at how absurd our economic system is, and the absurdity of a world where it feels like one sort of like brick of our Jenga tower could be pushed out and the whole thing could collapse at any moment. So this world is sort of, if you stop to think about it, people are cabling through the woods, they're connecting these transistors. It's a very absurd form of labor, yet somehow it feels possible. And so I guess that frame of LAPSIS was intriguing to me. It's an absurd world that is possible because we recognize it as our own.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the world gets more absurd every single day. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? But that does make me think of the fact that I think it's been described for your film that it's set in like a parallel present, not necessarily like a not so distant future or anything like that. If that is in fact the case, can you explain why you decided to create the story that way?
Yeah, I don't really like saying it happens in the future, because if anyone watches the film, I think they'll see that the technology in the film doesn't necessarily feel futuristic. I think we definitely have a retro futurism going on in the film. And that's intentional, because I want it to feel like this is a version of our world, as I was just talking about, that's possible. And so a parallel present isn't really a future, nor is it a past. It's not like this is a different version of the 90s or something. What parallel present kind of means to me is that it creates a place for parable and for satire, where you feel the reverberations of our world in it, but it's not like, oh, it's so far off. It's in the future, so it's so far off, we don't need to worry about this yet, which a lot of dystopian sci-fi does. And I think that sometimes has an unfortunate effect of distancing you from the possibility that this could be real. So I wanted it to feel very real, very possible. And so parallel present to me just speaks to the possibility, in our every moment, our day-to-day life of this world.
Yeah, I feel like it is definitely a distinct possibility that something like this would come up. So I know that this is your fiction feature film debut and that you've made shorts and that you've made documentaries before. So what was that transition like? And was there anything that surprised you about the process compared to those other filmmaking techniques?
Yeah, it's very different from making, some of the documentaries I've made have been very much just me out in the field somewhere, like, you know, one man banding it. And then I've also gotten to collaborate on documentaries too, but a lot of the documentary work is very solitary, and making a feature narrative film is a deeply collaborative process. Even though I wore many hats in this film, it involved a crew of, you know, up to 30 people at times, and we had over, I think, 100 speaking parts on the film. So it was a huge operation at a very low budget. And so those scaling issues of trying to make like a sci-fi world feel bigger than it is on a low budget, those were entirely new challenges for me. So I had to learn a lot on the spot. Luckily, I had gotten into commercial work for the last decade to kind of make a living in New York. So some of the same like things you learn trying to make commercials with a slightly bigger crew than documentaries did help with making a narrative feature. I did do a couple of shorts before it, so that helped prepare me for it. But I guess the main thing that was different, but that I loved about it, was the amount of cooks in the kitchen. That can be used as a negative a lot of the time, but in this case, we had an incredible creative team. The production design of this film was so important, and I felt like it was so moving for me to kind of feel like, whereas in the documentaries I had to kind of take the whole project on my back. If I wasn't doing it, it wasn't going to happen. Here I would sit in meetings and sort of hear people bringing their ideas, and to feel like people were getting excited about the world and starting to build it collectively. It was really different and intoxicating.
So that was something I thought was interesting when I was reading some other interviews that you had done, where this movie is about the gig economy, about how it exploits workers and creates probably unfortunate workplaces, but you had set out to like go the extra mile and make sure that your film set was not exploiting your workers and was creating like a ethical workplace for all the people who are collaborating with you on your set. And I would just love to hear more about what that process was like and what it looked like in action.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So that the thinking there was that you can't, if you make a film about your political standing on, you know, poor labor practices, and then you have poor labor practices on your film set, which many do, then what are you doing? Like and it wasn't just for this project though. I mean that resounds, right? But it was, as someone who's come up working on many different sets, visiting many different sets, I come from kind of a film industry family, and I've been very familiar with the way that people, especially who are coming up in the industry, are exploited. Their labor is exploited in this industry, and so before I thought that I would, you know, throw my hat into the ring to make my film, I thought it was crucial to develop a way in which I could articulate how I wanted to make the film, and that would be somehow different than the ways I've seen other films made and the kind of exploitation I've seen. So in order to do that, I took inspiration from a short documentary I'd made about a science lab in Newfoundland that used a handbook to kind of orchestrate their scientific practice, but orchestrate their practice along anti-colonial, feminist, and queer lines. So this is an unusual laboratory, but they conduct their research with those principles. And I adapted their scientific handbook into a filmmaking handbook to onboard everyone that we hired, you know, for our crew, all our actors. And so everyone who became involved in the process was brought in with this handbook, and we had meetings about it, and we talked about the principles in it. And it basically just lays out the ways in which people are exploited in the film industry and what we're going to do differently about it. And it gave us a sort of vocabulary to talk to each other on set with and to resolve issues as they came up. And so some of the main, things that this handbook ensures is that people are paid at least a living wage. There's a lot of sub minimum wage labor that goes into making films, and we didn't have any of that. That was like number one. And then also just if someone is sick, tired, or heartbroken, they can go home. They don't have to work. And beyond that, it was just, it showed up in like the little interactions between people on set. And I think anyone who worked on the film, we got a lot of feedback. We asked people afterwards about the handbook and how they felt like it impacted the set and everything. And it was overwhelmingly positive and encouraging to hear people loving this new way of sort of organizing the way in which they were coming on the project. So that was kind of the rationale and how it happened.
That's super amazing.
And, I want to say too that the handbook it's openly available on our production company website, couple3films.com/handbook. And if anyone else wants to, it's like Creative Commons. So if anyone else wants to take it and adapt it or just use it as is on their productions, they can.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So then probably one of the happy employees on your set was the actor who played Ray. And I'm curious to find out how you cast him, because it didn't look like he had been in a lot of stuff before this film, and he was so great in the film.
Thank you. In the last conversation, I think it was Brandon was talking about how he wouldn't have made the film if it wasn't for that like he had to make the film for this actor. And this was very much the case for me with Dean Imperial, who plays Ray. I wrote the film for him. He hadn't been in it. It was such a like weird, crazy decision to make to not see someone act and then write a film for them and cast them in it and then raise a bunch of money to make the film for that, with that person starring in it. I was told many times that was insane, but I knew that he would be perfect for the role. And yeah, he's a friend of mine from New York, and he's in this Naked Angels theater company. And I'd seen him at one reading, but I hadn't seen him on screen and anything. So that was the gamble, but I kind of just knew it in my gut that it was right. We wouldn't have made the film for someone else. And he was my muse writing the film. So it's crazy how these things happen, but I think he did an incredible job, and I hope that he keeps acting because I think he's fantastic.
I definitely agree. So I know you have mentioned that you're working on a fairly low budget, but I think the film looks fantastic, and I especially love the little robots that are working alongside the people in the woods. And were those real robots, and how did you make them?
Yes, they were real. We would not have been able to afford making them, so we got them donated by the University of Pennsylvania, a robotics lab called the COD lab at UPenn, who made some of the early robots for Boston Dynamics. Maybe people have seen their like viral videos of these humanoid and dog robots that freak people out. But this one attracted me because it kind of looks like an insect slightly, but it's not as like scary in a way. It's sort of, there's something endearing about it almost, the way it moves. So they made it a student project, and they sent 3 students with 2 of these robots, and we had no idea if the robots would perform or not until the day they arrived. We had visited them at their lab. They looked good on the floor of their lab, but we were out in the forest. We were going up little hills and all sorts of terrain. So we weren't sure if the robots were going to perform or not until we got out there. We didn't, we couldn't afford like doing tests or anything. So they arrived, it worked, and we had 5 days with them, and they were real. And so these students controlled them with little controllers right off, the frame and it was kind of a miracle. And we also were spared by the weather gods, and it didn't rain us out any of the 5 like precious days that we had these robots for.
Well, they looked super great, and I am really happy you didn't choose those dog robots, because I have seen those and they are horrifying.
Yeah, I know. It's like it can be too scary. And there was something I liked about these. Yeah.
Yeah, they were pretty cute, even though they were the enemies. Or I guess the people were the enemies. Anyway, so I feel like this film demonstrates so much promise. Do you have anything else that you're working on next?
Well, I hope it does, because I do have a new script that I've been working on that's coming along, and I'll hope to get it made. It's in the sci-fi world, so we'll see what happens. I mean, it's been a weird year with this film, having everything virtual. It feels like, is it like getting out? You know, is it like making it out? I think it is. I mean, here we are, right? So it's just funny. It's a funny year to like get so amped up and have your first film hit the world, and then it's like, we were part of South by Southwest. You know, it was like the first one that got canceled, and so, oh my God, what a weird year. But it's wonderful just to still have an opportunity to like connect and talk to people. So thank you guys for doing this.
Absolutely, our pleasure. And yeah, I feel like this is a good year for everybody to start writing stuff. So I feel like you're in good company. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you to all of our guests. We have Eric, Amber, and Marco, along with Noah. And I think we're going to wrap things up tonight. So thank you, Noah, and have a good night. And everybody out there, make sure to watch all of these films on watch.mkfilm.org. There is Toto and Shorts Grab Bag, the 2 films in our Black Lens Shorts programs, and then LAPSIS, which is in American Indies. So check it out until October 29th, and have a great night.
Thank you.